Okay, so who has ever had an idea, a dream, or a passion, something that you really want to turn into a reality? And it could be anything. It could be something for your local community, or it could be a charitable act. It could be launching a startup, taking a product to market. It doesn't really matter what it is, but it's an idea that you have a burning passion to make happen. It's the sort of idea that has its home in the pub. When one of your friends asks you to go for a Swift half, and we all know that means at least two, and you're sat there with a group of friends and you have your first pint and your second, but never normally more than three, and bam, that gap in the market just appears, or that thing that you really want to do, you recognise. But what happens to most of those? A lot of the time they stay in the back of our heads or in our notepads, and they don't ever actually become a reality because it's quite difficult to do that. And what about if I was to stand here on stage and very pretentiously tell you that you could take whatever idea you have and you could make it a reality? And I'm not just preaching and say you could do it in the future, at some point down the road, but we could do it today. And even more than that, it doesn't have to be today, we could do it in the next 16 minutes. Would you believe me? Probably not. I wouldn't. Because it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to take an idea like launching a business and turn it into a reality. It's complicated, it's complex. And why would it not be? Life is full of complexities. There's contracts and policies, work-life balance, relationships, trying to get through the self-service supermarket till without it calling for assistance. And this is just life. If that's really difficult, then why would turning your idea into a reality be any different? But if you did have a simple idea and you could take away some of the complexity, we all know that ideas cost money, and where are we going to find money from? Well, we go to the bank. And I don't know if anybody's been to the bank to try and get a loan for a startup, but they usher you down a corridor, and you go into a room, and you're sat across a desk from a business banking manager, and you present them with a business plan, and that business plan is taking you hours and hours and hours to do. And you have a look around the room, and the conversation's stuffy, and the decor's a bit drab. There's no real personalization there. And the conversation goes on for about an hour. The business banking manager is typing into his computer. And inevitably, at the end of that hour, they have this screen which they turn around. All of them have one of these, by the way. It's on every business banking manager's desk, a monitor which spins. And inevitably, the computer says no. So we're back at square one. And even if we manage to get past the money bit, then there's this big thing about uncertainty, because we think we've got a good idea. Our friends in the pub would agree, but of course they would, because they'd had 2 pints and they're our friends. How do we know that if we build it, they will actually come? It's very difficult. We might do some analysis on customers and trends, but it's all just data extrapolation. We can never really be sure. And that's just things that happen to us. There's all these other things happening, external influences like the uncertainty in our economy, the distrust in our institutions, there's inequality and unfairness and Brexit. And all of these are real hurdles that stop us from taking our ideas and turning them into a reality. But that's not something that I accept. I think we can do better. And I think as a room, together, now, collaboratively, if everybody's up for it, we can take an idea and we've got 14 minutes to make it happen, if we're up for it. And so I've been walking around in the breaks and I've been chatting to a few people, and I happen to know that there are some amazing ideas in the room. But there's one person that I spoke to called Greg. Greg sat at the back there, who has an amazing idea. So Greg introduced himself to me as a crazy psychiatrist. And Greg works with people who have mental health problems. And one of the ways that somebody with mental health issues can go through the rehabilitation is to make sure they have responsibilities and accountability, and they're learning new skills that helps society. And so Greg was talking about opening up a cafe or a restaurant that these people that he works with can come and work in, and people like me and you, the Joe Public, can go in and get a delicious meal, and everybody seems to be a winner. And if we're up for it, I think let's do that one, if everybody agrees. So we've got these 3 big hurdles, right? We've got complexity, we've got money, and we've got uncertainty. The complexity one, I think a restaurant is quite big, and I'm just going to take the lead here and say let's scale it down, let's make it actionable, and let's turn your restaurant, Greg, if this is all right with you, by the way, And we'll go for something much smaller and do like a pop-up. Let's just start with a pop-up restaurant or a food truck. Has anyone seen the film Chef by John Favreau? Great film. I challenge you to watch it and not want to start your own food truck business. So if we've got a food truck, that feels a lot simpler. It's not quite as big. It's something that we can action. Now we've got the money. We're going to do this in the room. We're not going to ask any permission from anyone. We're not interested in the computer says no. And I'll kick it off, Greg. I will give you £10 towards your food truck. And I reckon it's going to be 10 grand we need to raise, something like that, to make this happen. So I'll give you 10 quid. And the reason why I'm happy to just donate you 10 quid is because if you can do this and have an impact on some of these people's lives, I'm going to get some joy out of that. That's going to make me feel good. And so I'm happy to give you 10 quid. Is there anybody else in the audience, in the room, who wants to put their hands up and say, yeah, I'll give 10 quid to you, Greg? Amazing. Oh my God, there's lots of people. So I'm thinking there was about 60 people that put their hand up. That's a rough guess. 60 people, £10 a person, we're at 600 quid. So we're quite a long way short of where we need to go. Greg, we need to figure out how to get more money out of these people. How would you get more money out of me? Well, if it's a donation I'm giving you, I'm going to cap it at a certain amount. But what about if when you launch the food truck, you give me some food in return for the money that I'm going to give you? Then all of a sudden the £10 doesn't, there's no ceiling price on the 10 quid. If I was to give you 50 quid, would you give me 50 quid's worth of food when you're up and running? And that's more food than I can eat. Or if I gave you 100 quid, maybe I could come once a month to the food truck and you can sort me out with a dinner for a year. And if I gave you £1,000, I'm not going to give you £1,000, but if I gave you £1,000, someone in the room gave you £1,000, then maybe you could take the food truck to a private function that they're putting on, and there'd be 100 people there, £10 a head, and you could feed all of them using this food truck idea. If we did that, and we were no longer donating £10, but we managed to bump that up to, say, 50 quid, which doesn't seem like a stretch, because we're getting value out of it, it's two-way, then all of a sudden we've gone from £600 to 3,000. And we've only been doing this for 8 minutes. But we're still short, so we need to cast the net wider. How are we going to do that? Well, I've got a phone in my pocket. I'm sure everybody else has a phone in their pocket. And I know for a fact that I could send a message to 5 of my friends, just a really simple, basic text message. And one of those 5 people would come in. And on average, I reckon they'd give the 50 quid that we're all pledging. And if all of us did that, all 60 of us who put our hands up, how long do you reckon that would take? 90 seconds to send a text message to 5 friends and get one of them in? If everybody did that, we moved from 60 people pledging 50 quid to 120 people pledging 50 quid. We've gone from 3 grand to 6 grand. Now we've got momentum. Now we're rolling. It actually feels like we can do this. But we're still short. So let's supercharge our message on our phone. Let's stick it on Facebook, because then there's not 5 people, there's 300. And if all of us did that at the same time, we could reach thousands of people. And how much effort would it take for us to do that together? Not much, about 90 seconds. And then we could do the same on Twitter, or we could send it out to our email list. And do you see how quite quickly we could move that 6,000 to 7,000 to 8,000 as these people get aware of it, they start to engage with the food truck idea that Greg wants to do, and they come in and give 50 quid. But we might not be at the 10 grand we need just yet. So imagine if the people that we got to come in did the same thing that we've all just done, and they sent a message to their friends. And some of them came in and sent a message to their friends, who came in, sent a message to their friends. I think in about 8 minutes, we've managed to solve the money problem. So then there's this final thing about uncertainty. How do we know for sure? Greg, how can you have confidence that if you do this, people will come and they'll use the food truck and they'll enable you to open up a restaurant in the future? But we've solved that too, because we're not just donating you cash. You're giving us some of the food in return, which makes us your customers. And that means that you've got a business model that before it's even launched, you've got 60, 120, 200 customers. When can you be more confident about a business model than that? And this is slightly theatrical, right? And it is a bit hypothetical, but you can take these concepts and you can make your idea a reality in the real world. And there's a tool that you can use for that. It's called crowdfunding. And crowdfunding is taking down all of these traditional barriers that would normally stop us from making these things happen. And it's really disruptive, and it's exploding because it forces us to focus on simplicity. If it's complex, we won't be able to get people to buy into the idea. And it's empowering us to do this on our own. We didn't have to ask anyone's permission at all. And we managed to do this in 10 minutes flat. And if we were to do this in real life, then it would sit online. We would create a project and it would live on the internet. And that's really important because lots of people have access to the internet. And that means that there's a very low barrier to entry. It doesn't matter who you are, what your history is, what race you are, how much money you've got in the bank account. If you've got a good idea, then together as a crowd, you can get people to support you. And there's 46 million people online in the UK right now, which means that if you do have an idea and you get a backer and they share it, and some of those people come in and they share it, quite quickly your potential crowd, your potential customer base or community is anyone in the digital environment. And crowdfunding creates a perfect ideas testing bay, because if nobody had put their hand up at the start, it would have been an excruciatingly painful next 15 minutes for me. But it's also a surefire sign that actually nobody cares about a food truck idea, right? Which is a really harsh thing. It could be a harsh reality for you to hear, Greg, but it's better that you know that now before putting your own considerable amount of time, money, effort, energy into an idea that ultimately isn't going to last and isn't sustainable. You failed, but you failed quickly. And you can pivot that idea and you can try doing something else that might get you more traction. And it does all of this in a very risk-free environment. Because if you were to take your idea and go for a loan in the bank, which we all know you can do, you're asking that one institution to take on quite a lot of the risk. But what we did was took that risk profile and shared it across 60 people, and then 120, and then maybe 200. And we're all in for 10 quid or 20 quid or 50 or maybe one or two put in some more. And that means that the availability of the funding we're after is a lot more open. It's a lot more accessible. It's less bureaucratic. And we really need this right now, because we are living in a time when there's uncertainty in our economy. And so we should be insisting on the kind of validation that crowdfunding gives us. And we do live in a time when there's distrust in our institutions. And so we should be insisting on the kind of empowerment that crowdfunding can give us. And there is inequality and there is unfairness. And so we should be reducing the barriers in the way that crowdfunding can allow us to do that. And just imagine if all of us were crowdfunding our ideas. What would that look like? Well, we'd start to drive value that's shared around the community and that is based on simplicity. We start to drive real change based on real people's thoughts and real people's validations. Supply would be led almost entirely by demand. We're less wasteful because we're only putting resources into the things that we actually want to see happen. We'd decentralize, we'd empower ourselves to make these changes, and we'd take more control over sculpting a world that we want to be part of. The economic powerhouse of the country becomes the person who sat on your left and on your right. For your idea, it could be your next door neighbour, or it could be somebody who lives miles away, but they just happen to share your vision, your passion for doing something differently, for starting a new idea and creating a new future. And that's a future that's not directed by the few, but by the many. It's directed by the community, and it's got real support behind it. And actually, that future is one that's not too far away. All it really depends on is our participation. Because if you don't have an idea, then that's okay. You've got the power to enable someone else who does have one that you believe in. And if you do have an idea and you want to make that a reality, then why aren't you crowdfunding it? And why don't you start today? Thank you.